The private jet tilted hard to the left, and Amelia Foster's stomach dropped to her feet. She gripped the armrest of her leather seat as the cabin shook with a violence she had never experienced before. The overhead compartments rattled. Her laptop slid off the tray table and crashed to the floor. Through the small oval window she could see nothing but gray, a thick blanket of storm clouds that had swallowed the plane whole. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." The pilot's voice crackled through the speaker, but there was something wrong with his tone. It was too tight, too controlled. "We are experiencing severe turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain seated." Amelia was already buckled in. Her fingers fumbled to pull the strap tighter across her lap. Across the aisle, Jonathan Pierce, her boss and the CEO of Pierce Industries, was doing the same. His blue dress shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and for the first time in the 3 years she had worked for him, she saw fear in his eyes. The plane dropped. It was not a gentle descent. It was a plunge, a sickening free fall that made Amelia's ears pop and her heart slam against her ribs. She heard herself scream, but the sound was lost in the roar of the engines fighting against something much bigger than themselves. "Jonathan," she gasped, not even realizing she had used his first name instead of Mr. Pierce. He looked at her. His hand reached across the aisle and she grabbed it without thinking. His grip was strong, warm, and terrified. "It is going to be okay," he said, but his voice shook. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out. Emergency strips along the floor glowed an eerie red. The plane lurched again and Amelia could feel them spinning, turning in ways that planes should never turn. Her red sundress twisted around her legs. Her curly hair whipped across her face. She could not breathe. She could not think. All she could do was hold onto Jonathan's hand and pray. The pilot's voice came again, but this time there was no pretense of calm. "Brace for impact. Brace for impact. Brace for..." The world exploded into noise and light and pain. Amelia felt the impact in every bone of her body. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Water, cold and shocking, rushed into the cabin from somewhere she could not see. She was thrown forward and the seatbelt cut into her waist so hard she thought it might slice her in two. Then something hit her head and everything went black. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on sand. White, soft, blinding sand. The sun was shining. The sky was blue and clear as if the storm had never existed. Waves lapped gently at her feet, and for a long, confused moment, Amelia thought she was dreaming. She thought she had died and this was some strange version of heaven. Then the pain hit. Her head throbbed. Her ribs ached. Her left arm was scraped and bleeding, the skin raw and red against her brown complexion. She groaned and tried to sit up, and that was when she saw the wreckage. Pieces of the plane were scattered across the beach. A wing jutted out of the shallow water like a broken bird. Luggage and debris floated in the surf. Smoke rose from somewhere beyond the tree line. And lying a few feet away from her, face down in the sand, was Jonathan Pierce. "Jonathan." Her voice came out as a croak. She crawled toward him, ignoring the pain in her body. "Jonathan, wake up." She turned him over and her heart nearly stopped. His face was pale, too pale, and there was a gash on his forehead that was bleeding steadily. But when she pressed her fingers to his neck, she felt a pulse. Strong, steady, alive. "Come on," she whispered, patting his cheek. "Please wake up. Please." His eyes fluttered open. Blue eyes, the color of the ocean behind her. For a moment he just stared at her, confused and disoriented. Then recognition flooded his face. "Amelia." He sat up too fast and winced, pressing a hand to his ribs. "What happened? Where are we?" She looked around. Beyond the beach, a dense jungle of palm trees and thick vegetation rose up like a green wall. There were no buildings, no boats, no people. Just sand and water and wilderness stretching as far as she could see. "I do not know," she said quietly. "But I do not think anyone is coming for us." Jonathan struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. Amelia rose with him, steadying him with a hand on his arm. Together, they stood at the edge of the water and looked out at the endless horizon. There was nothing out there. Just blue meeting blue, sky and sea blending into one. "The pilot," Jonathan said suddenly. "Captain Reynolds. We need to find him." They searched the beach for an hour. They found more wreckage, more luggage, a first aid kit that had somehow survived intact. But they did not find Captain Reynolds. They did not find anyone. They were alone. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they had gathered what supplies they could. Water bottles, some packaged snacks, a few blankets, the first aid kit. They dragged everything to a spot beneath a large palm tree and sat down, exhausted and shaken. Amelia cleaned the cut on Jonathan's forehead with supplies from the first aid kit. He sat still and let her work, his eyes following her movements. "Thank you," he said when she was done. "You are welcome." She sat back and wrapped her arms around her knees. Her red sundress was torn and stained with sand and salt water, but she barely noticed. "What do we do now?" Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We survive. We stay alive until someone finds us. And if no one finds us." He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Something soft and sad and determined all at once. "Then we figure it out together. Before you continue reading, I have to ask you something. Amelia is stuck on a deserted island with no help in sight, injured and scared, with only her boss by her side. Would you abandon her right now? Would you leave without knowing if she makes it?" If you want to see what happens to Amelia and Jonathan, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss a single chapter. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think they will survive? Do you think love can grow in the middle of disaster? Let me know your thoughts. The night came slowly and with it came the cold. Amelia had not expected that. She had thought tropical islands were supposed to be warm all the time. But without the sun, with the ocean breeze blowing across the beach, she found herself shivering beneath the thin blanket she had wrapped around her shoulders. Jonathan noticed. He always noticed things even when she wished he would not. He moved closer to her without a word and draped his own blanket over both of them, pressing his shoulder against hers. "Body heat," he said simply. "It is the most efficient way to stay warm." She nodded, too tired to argue, too grateful to question it. They sat together in the darkness, listening to the waves crash against the shore and the unfamiliar sounds of the jungle behind them. "I keep thinking about my mother," Amelia said quietly. "She is going to be so worried when she finds out about the crash. She watches the news every morning. She is going to see it and she is going to think I am dead." Jonathan did not say anything comforting or dismissive. He just listened. "She has been through so much already," Amelia continued. "My father left when I was 12. She raised me and my sister alone. Put us both through school working double shifts at the hospital. And now my sister Grace is in nursing school, and the tuition is so expensive, and my mom will not stop working even though she is exhausted all the time and I—" Her voice cracked. "I just wanted to help them. That is why I took this job. That is why I work so hard. I wanted to give them a better life." "You will," Jonathan said. His voice was quiet but firm. "You will see them again, Amelia. I promise." She looked at him in the darkness, at the outline of his face against the stars. "You cannot promise that." "I know." He paused. "But I am going to do everything in my power to make sure it happens." She did not know why, but she believed him. They fell asleep eventually, sitting upright against the trunk of the palm tree, shoulders touching, blankets shared. And when Amelia woke up just before dawn, her head was resting on Jonathan's shoulder, and his arm was around her waist, holding her steady. She did not move away. She was not sure she wanted to. The sunrise was beautiful. Amelia sat on the beach and watched it happen, watched the sky turn from deep purple to soft pink to brilliant gold. The ocean reflected the colors like a mirror, and for a moment she could almost forget where she was. She could almost pretend she was on vacation, watching the sunrise from the deck of a luxury resort instead of a deserted island. Then her stomach growled and reality came rushing back. Jonathan was already awake, moving around the beach with purpose. He had found a large piece of the plane's fuselage that had washed ashore and was dragging it toward their makeshift camp. "What are you doing?" Amelia asked, standing up and brushing the sand from her sundress. "Building shelter." He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "That palm tree is not going to protect us if it rains. We need something more solid." She walked over to help him. Together, they dragged the metal panel across the sand and propped it against a cluster of rocks. It was not much, but it was a start. "I never pictured you doing manual labor," Amelia admitted as they stepped back to survey their work. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What did you picture?" "I do not know. Board meetings. Golf. Expensive dinners with investors." He laughed, and the sound was so unexpected that Amelia found herself smiling too. It was the first time she had ever heard him laugh. In 3 years of working together, she had seen him smile politely at clients, nod in approval at presentations, and occasionally frown at disappointing quarterly reports. But she had never heard him laugh. "I grew up on a farm in Iowa," he said. "My grandfather taught me how to build things with my hands before he taught me anything about business." "A farm." Amelia stared at him. "You." "Jonathan Pierce. Billionaire CEO. grew up on a farm. A small one. Corn and soybeans mostly. We barely made ends meet. He picked up another piece of debris and tossed it onto their growing pile of supplies. The money came later. My father started Pierce Industries when I was in high school. I did not grow up wealthy, Amelia. I grew up working. She did not know what to say to that. She had assumed so many things about him, built up an image in her mind of who he was based on his tailored suits and corner office and the way people seemed to shrink in his presence. But that image was cracking now, revealing something underneath that she had never seen before. "Come on," Jonathan said, interrupting her thoughts. "We need to find water. The bottles we salvaged will not last forever." They spent the morning exploring the edge of the jungle. The vegetation was dense and tangled, filled with plants Amelia did not recognize and sounds that made her jump at every turn. But Jonathan moved through it with surprising confidence, pushing aside branches and testing the ground ahead of them with careful steps. Around midday they found a small stream. The water was clear and cold, flowing down from somewhere higher up the island. Amelia dropped to her knees beside it and cupped her hands, bringing the water to her lips. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "We should not drink too much at once," Jonathan warned. "We do not know if it is safe. But we can fill the bottles and boil the water later to be sure." She nodded, suddenly aware of how much she did not know about survival. She had grown up in Atlanta, surrounded by concrete and convenience stores. The closest she had ever come to nature was the occasional trip to Piedmont Park. But here, on this island, the rules were different. Here, knowledge meant life or death. "How do you know all this?" she asked as they made their way back to camp with full water bottles. "Boy Scouts," Jonathan said with a small smile. "And a lot of survival documentaries. I used to watch them when I could not sleep." "You have trouble sleeping?" "Sometimes." He glanced at her. "Running a company is not as glamorous as it looks. The responsibility weighs on you. All those people depending on you for their livelihoods. All those decisions that could make or break everything." Amelia had never thought about it that way. She had always seen Jonathan as confident, unshakable, the kind of man who had all the answers. But maybe nobody had all the answers. Maybe everyone was just doing their best and hoping it was enough. When they got back to camp, they worked together to build a fire pit. Jonathan showed her how to arrange the rocks in a circle, how to gather dry leaves and twigs for kindling, how to use the small lighter he had found in one of the suitcases to coax a flame to life. By the time the sun began to set, they had a real fire going. They sat beside it, eating crackers and dried fruit from the salvaged snacks, and Amelia felt something she had not expected to feel. "Oh, we are going to be okay," she said, more to herself than to him. Jonathan looked at her across the flames. The firelight played across his face, highlighting the cut on his forehead and the stubble on his jaw and the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. "Yes," he said. "We are." That night, they slept under the metal shelter, side by side on the sand with their blankets spread beneath them. And when Amelia woke up in the middle of the night, startled by some distant animal sound, Jonathan's hand found hers in the darkness. "It is okay," he murmured, still half asleep. "I am here." She squeezed his hand and closed her eyes. For the first time since the crash, she was not afraid. 5 days passed. Amelia stopped counting the hours after the first day, when every minute felt like an eternity. Instead, she counted sunrises. Each one meant they had made it through another night. Each one was a small victory. They developed a routine. In the mornings, they gathered firewood and checked the signal fire they kept burning on the highest point of the beach. In the afternoons, they searched for food and collected water from the stream. In the evenings, they ate whatever they had managed to find and talked until the stars came out. Amelia discovered that Jonathan was full of surprises. He knew how to fashion a fishing spear from a long branch and a sharp rock. He knew which plants were safe to eat and which ones would make them sick. He knew how to read the clouds to predict the weather and how to find north using the position of the sun. "You are like a walking survival guide," she told him one afternoon as he showed her how to weave palm fronds into a basket for carrying fruit. He smiled, but there was something sad in his eyes. "I always thought I would need these skills someday. I just did not expect it to be like this." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, his fingers working the palm leaves with practiced ease. "I used to imagine running away. Disappearing somewhere nobody could find me. Starting over." Amelia set down the leaves she was holding. "Why?" "Because I was lonely." He said it simply, without self-pity. "Just stating a fact. I have everything money can buy, Amelia. Houses, cars, private jets. But I do not have anyone who sees me as anything other than a source of income or a stepping stone to success. People want things from me. They always want things. I do not want anything from you, she said quietly. He looked at her, and his eyes were so blue and so open that she felt like she could fall into them. I know. That is why I like being around you. She did not know how to respond to that. So she just picked up her palm fronds and kept weaving, but her heart was beating faster than it should have been. That evening, Jonathan caught 2 fish in the shallow tide pools at the edge of the beach. Amelia watched him wade into the water in his rolled-up pants, patient and focused, waiting for just the right moment to strike. When he emerged with the fish held high, water dripping from his hair and a triumphant grin on his face, she laughed out loud. Look at you, she said. The mighty hunter. Mock me all you want. He walked up the beach toward her, still grinning. You are going to be very happy when you taste these. He was right. She was. They cooked the fish over the fire, using sticks as skewers and sea salt that had dried on the rocks. It was the best meal Amelia had ever had. Not because the fish was particularly special, but because they had caught it themselves. Because they were alive to eat it. Because they were together. Tell me something about yourself that nobody knows, Jonathan said as they sat by the fire, picking the last bits of fish from the bones. Amelia thought about it. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I was obsessed with dolphins. I had dolphin posters on my walls, dolphin stuffed animals on my bed, dolphin everything. What happened? Life happened. She shrugged. My dad left. My mom needed help. There was not time for dreams anymore, just survival. And then I got older and practical seemed more important than passionate. It is not too late, you know? She looked at him. For what? For dreams. His voice was gentle. It is never too late to want things for yourself, Amelia. She felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. Your turn. Tell me something nobody knows about you. He stared into the fire for a long moment. Then he said, I have been in love exactly once in my life. And I never told her. Why not? Because I was afraid. He glanced at her, then back at the flames. I was afraid that if I told her, everything would change. That I would lose her. That she would see me differently. So I kept quiet and I watched her from a distance, and I told myself that it was enough. Was it? No. His voice was barely above a whisper. It was never enough. Amelia wanted to ask who the woman was. She wanted to know everything. But something held her back, some instinct that told her the answer might be more than she was ready to hear. So she just sat with him in the firelight, shoulder to shoulder, and let the silence speak for itself. On the 8th day it rained. Not the violent storm that had brought their plane down, but a gentle, steady rain that fell from gray skies and turned the sand to mud. Amelia and Jonathan retreated to their shelter, which had grown considerably since those first desperate hours. They had reinforced it with more pieces of wreckage, woven palm fronds into the gaps to keep out the wind, and lined the floor with soft leaves and salvaged seat cushions. It was not a palace, but it was home. They sat together and watched the rain fall, and Jonathan told her about his childhood. About his mother, who had died when he was 10. About his father, who had thrown himself into work to cope with the grief and had never really stopped. About the emptiness of their big house in the suburbs, where the silence was louder than any noise. That is why I work so hard, he said. Not because I love business. Because I do not know how to do anything else. It is all I have. Amelia's heart ached for him. She had always thought rich people had easy lives, that money could fix anything. But sitting here in this makeshift shelter, listening to Jonathan talk about loneliness that no amount of money could cure, she realized how wrong she had been. You have more than work, she said softly. He looked at her. What do I have? You have kindness. You have intelligence. You have patience. She reached out and touched his hand. You have me. The words hung in the air between them. Amelia felt her cheeks grow warm and she started to pull her hand back, but Jonathan caught it. His fingers intertwined with hers and he held on tight. You mean that, he said. It was not a question. Yes. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was such a small gesture, but it made her heart race like nothing else ever had. Tell me about your family, he said, still holding her hand. Tell me everything. So she did. She told him about her mother, Nicole, who worked as a nurse and had the biggest heart of anyone Amelia had ever known. She told him about her sister, Grace, who was 23 and in her second year of nursing school, following in their mother's footsteps. She told him about their tiny apartment in Atlanta, where the 3 of them had lived for years, making do with what they had and dreaming of something better. Grace is going to be an amazing nurse, Amelia said, pride warming her voice. She is so smart and she cares so much. But the tuition is killing us. I have been sending money home every month, but it is never enough. My mom keeps taking extra shifts and I keep telling her to stop, but she will not listen. Why did you not say anything? Jonathan's voice was gentle, not accusatory. I could have helped. Amelia shook her head. I did not want to be that person. The employee with her hand out, asking for special treatment. I wanted to earn everything on my own. There is no shame in accepting help, Amelia. I know that now. She squeezed his hand. Being here, surviving with you, has taught me that. Sometimes we need other people. Sometimes leaning on someone is not weakness. It is just human. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when we get off this island, I want to help your family. Not as your boss. As your friend. Please let me. She hesitated, old habits rising up inside her. But then she thought about her mother's tired eyes. Her sister's stress. The weight that had been pressing down on all of them for so long. Okay, she said. Thank you. Thank you for letting me. The rain continued to fall as the sky grew dark. They lit a small fire inside the shelter, carefully vented so the smoke could escape, and huddled together for warmth. Jonathan pulled out a slightly damp deck of cards he had found in one of the suitcases, and they played game after game as the night wore on. Go fish, Amelia said for the third time in a row. Jonathan groaned and drew from the pile. You are cheating. I do not know how, but you are definitely cheating. I would never. She grinned and laid down another set of matching cards. I am just naturally talented. At lying, apparently. At winning. He laughed, that real laugh she was coming to love, and threw his remaining cards at her. They scattered across the leaves and Amelia laughed too, catching them as they fell. When the laughter faded, they were both quiet. Jonathan was looking at her in a way he never had before, with something soft and wondering in his eyes. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered on her cheek for just a moment. I just like seeing you smile. You should do it more often. So should you. He smiled then, a real smile that lit up his whole face. I will work on it. They fell asleep that night with the sound of rain on the roof and their hands still loosely intertwined. And when Amelia dreamed, she dreamed of blue eyes and gentle touches and a future that seemed suddenly, impossibly possible. The real storm came on the 12th night. Amelia woke to the sound of wind screaming through the trees. The shelter shuddered around them, palm fronds tearing away from the frame and flying into the darkness. Rain poured down in sheets so thick she could barely see a foot in front of her face. Jonathan. She reached out in the dark and found his arm. Jonathan, wake up. He was already awake. He pulled her close as the shelter groaned and swayed. We need to move, he shouted over the wind. This is not going to hold. They grabbed what they could, blankets and water bottles and the precious first aid kit, and ran out into the storm. The sand was a river beneath their feet. Palm trees bent nearly double. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the beach in flashes of brilliant white. There. Jonathan pointed toward a cluster of large rocks further up the beach. We can shelter there. They ran. Amelia's feet slipped in the wet sand and she fell hard, scraping her hands and knees. But Jonathan was there immediately, pulling her up, his arm around her waist as they pushed forward. The rocks formed a natural alcove, shielded from the worst of the wind. They crawled inside and pressed themselves against the stone wall, huddling together for warmth and protection. Amelia was shaking, but she was not sure if it was from cold or fear or something else entirely. I am scared, she admitted, the words barely audible over the storm. Jonathan's arms tightened around her. I know. Me too. You do not seem scared of anything. I am scared of a lot of things. His voice was low and close to her ear. I am scared of losing the company. I am scared of disappointing everyone who depends on me. I am scared of dying alone. Amelia turned to look at him. Even in the darkness, she could see the outline of his face, the tension in his jaw, the vulnerability in his eyes. You are not alone, she said. No. He touched her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I am not. The storm raged outside, but inside that little alcove of rock, Amelia felt safe. Safer than she had felt in years. Maybe ever. There is something I need to tell you, Jonathan said. Okay. He took a breath. That person I mentioned. The one I was in love with but never told. Her heart stuttered. Yes. It is you, Amelia. She went very still. I have been in love with you since the day you started working for me, he continued. When you walked into my office for your interview in that green cardigan, clutching your resume like it was a lifeline. You were so nervous, but you looked me in the eye and told me exactly why I should hire you. No flattery, no games. Just honesty. Jonathan. Let me finish. Please. He took another breath. I told myself it would be inappropriate. You work for me. There are power dynamics. People would talk. But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared of rejection. Scared of ruining the one good thing in my life. Amelia's eyes were stinging with tears that had nothing to do with the rain. And then the plane crashed, Jonathan continued. And we ended up here. And I realized that none of those fears matter. What matters is that I love you. I have loved you for 3 years, and I do not want to go another day without telling you. She could barely breathe. Why are you telling me now? Because life is short. Because tomorrow is not promised. Because I would rather be rejected by you than spend one more minute pretending I do not feel this way. The storm howled outside. Thunder shook the rocks around them. But all Amelia could hear was the pounding of her own heart. I am not going to reject you, she whispered. You are not. No. She reached up and put her hand on his cheek. His skin was wet and cold, but his eyes were warm. I love you too, Jonathan. I have loved you for so long I do not remember what it felt like before. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and perfect. The storm raged, but they barely noticed. They were lost in each other, finally free to feel everything they had been holding back. When they pulled apart, Jonathan pressed his forehead to hers. If we survive this, he said, I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy. We are going to survive this, she said. And yes, please, I want that. He kissed her again, and Amelia knew with a certainty that went bone deep, that whatever happened next they would face it together. The storm passed by morning. Amelia and Jonathan emerged from the rock alcove into a world transformed. The beach was littered with debris, fallen branches and seaweed and pieces of their shelter scattered across the sand. The palm tree where they had first taken refuge had been split in half by lightning. But they were alive. Jonathan took Amelia's hand as they surveyed the damage. We need to rebuild. Better this time. Yes. They worked side by side all day. Jonathan found a spot further from the shore, closer to the jungle, where the trees would provide natural protection from the wind. They dragged the largest pieces of wreckage to the new location and began constructing a real shelter, with walls on all sides and a roof that would hold against rain. Amelia discovered she had skills she never knew she possessed. She learned to tie knots that would hold under pressure. She learned to weave palm fronds into tight, waterproof layers. She learned to problem solve on the fly, improvising tools and techniques when their limited supplies fell short. You are amazing, Jonathan said, watching her secure the last section of the roof. Do you know that? I am learning. She climbed down from the rock she had been standing on and brushed dirt from her blue blouse, which was now torn and faded but still her favorite thing to wear. We both are. That afternoon they explored further into the jungle than they had ventured before. The island was larger than Amelia had initially thought, stretching out in gentle hills that rose toward a central peak. They found more fruit trees, more freshwater streams, and a beautiful clearing where orchids grew wild and birds sang in the canopy above. It is like a garden, Amelia said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. A secret garden that nobody knows about. We know about it. Jonathan picked one of the orchids and handed it to her. It can be ours. She tucked the flower behind her ear and smiled at him. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, with his hair mussed and his clothes dirty and his eyes full of love, he had never looked more handsome. I could stay here forever, she said softly. Could you? His voice was serious now. If we never get rescued. This is our life now. Could you be happy? She thought about it. Really thought about it. About her mother and sister back home, about the life she had left behind, about everything she had ever wanted or dreamed. Then she looked at Jonathan and the answer was simple. Yes, she said. As long as I am with you. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and she felt it in every cell of her body. This was real. This was right. This was the future she wanted, no matter what form it took. I hope you are still with me. I hope you have not left Amelia and Jonathan alone on this island. Because they need you now more than ever. They have found love, but they have not found rescue. Subscribe if you have not already, and turn on notifications so you can see what happens next. Comment below, do you think they will ever be found? Do you want them to be found? Or would you want them to stay in their secret garden forever? I am reading every comment and I cannot wait to hear from you. Over the next few days their new life took shape. They built a proper bed inside their shelter, raised off the ground to keep away from insects, padded with soft leaves and covered with salvaged blankets. They created a cooking area outside with a fire pit ringed by stones and a makeshift grill made from airplane metal. They even built a storage system, shelves made from driftwood where they could keep their supplies organized and dry. "This is not so bad," Amelia said one evening as they sat outside their shelter and watched the sunset. "If I did not know better, I would think we were on some kind of rustic vacation." Jonathan laughed. "A very rustic vacation. With no room service. And no Wi-Fi. That might be the best part." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "No meetings. No deadlines. No one expecting anything from us except to just be. Is that what you want?" His voice was gentle. "To just be. I want to be with you. Everything else is details." He kissed the top of her head. "Then that is what we will do. Be together. Figure out the details as they come." They had stopped talking about rescue as something certain. It was still a hope, still a possibility they kept alive with their signal fire and their optimism. But it was no longer the only thing they were living for. They had found something precious in this strange, unexpected situation. Each other. "Tell me what you want," Jonathan said one night as they lay in their makeshift bed, staring up at the roof of their shelter. "If you could have anything in the world." Amelia thought about it. "I want my family to be okay. I want my sister to finish nursing school without the stress. I want my mom to retire and rest. What about for yourself?" "I want to be loved." She turned to look at him. "Really loved? Not because of what I can do for someone but just because of who I am." He reached out and brushed his fingers across her face. "You are loved, Amelia. You are so loved." "I know." She smiled and leaned into his touch. "That is why I have everything I want." 3 weeks on the island. Amelia marked it with a notch on a piece of driftwood she had turned into a calendar. 21 days. It felt longer and shorter at the same time, like time had lost all meaning in this place where the only rhythm was sunrise and sunset. She had changed. She could feel it in her body, stronger now from all the physical work. She could feel it in her mind, clearer without the constant noise of the outside world. And she could feel it in her heart, fuller than it had ever been. Jonathan had changed too. The rigid, controlled CEO she had known for 3 years had been replaced by someone softer, more open, more real. He laughed easily now. He talked about his fears and his dreams without hesitation. He told her he loved her at least 5 times a day, and he never seemed to tire of hearing her say it back. One afternoon they were sitting by the stream, filling their water bottles, when Jonathan said something that took her breath away. "I want to marry you." Amelia's hands went still on the bottle she was holding. "What?" "When we get off this island." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "When we get back to the real world. I want to marry you, Amelia Foster. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." "Jonathan, we have only been." She struggled to find the right words. "This is so new. And everything is different here. What if it does not last?" He finished her thought. "What if we get back to civilization and reality sets in and everything falls apart?" "Yes." He took her hands in his. "That is a risk I am willing to take. Because I would rather have 1 year with you, 1 month, 1 day than a lifetime without you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes. Or say no. Or say you need time to think. Any answer is okay, Amelia. I just needed you to know how I feel." She looked at him, this man who had turned her world upside down, who had shown her what love could be when it was real and true and brave. "Yes," she said. His face lit up. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." She was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Jonathan Pierce, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and she felt like she was flying, soaring above the treetops and the clouds and the whole wide world. "I do not have a ring," he said when they finally pulled apart. "I'm sorry. I know that is traditional." "We are not exactly traditional." She wiped her eyes and smiled. "Besides, you gave me something better than a ring." "What?" "Hope." She took his face in her hands. "You gave me hope, Jonathan. When everything was falling apart, when the plane was going down and I thought I was going to die, you gave me your hand and told me it was going to be okay. And then you spent every day proving it." "I love you," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I love you too." They stayed by the stream for hours talking about the future. About the wedding they would have, small and intimate with only the people who mattered. About the life they would build together, wherever and however it unfolded. About Amelia's family, who Jonathan insisted on meeting as soon as possible. "Your mother is going to hate me," he said. "Why?" "Because I am the guy who crashed a plane and stranded her daughter on a deserted island." Amelia laughed. "My mother is going to love you." She has been waiting for someone to take care of me for years. I will spend the rest of my life taking care of you. I know you will." That night they danced. There was no music except the sound of the waves and the wind in the trees, but they did not need any. Jonathan held her close and swayed gently, his hand warm on her back, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. And Amelia closed her eyes and let herself be happy, truly happy, for the first time in as long as she could remember. A month passed. The island had become their world and they had made it their own. They knew every path through the jungle, every fruit tree, every stream and tide pool. They had names for the birds that visited their camp each morning. They had a favorite spot on the beach where they watched the sunset every evening. And they had each other. That was the most important thing. But they had not stopped hoping for rescue. Every day they tended the signal fire. Every time they heard a distant sound that could be an engine, they ran to the beach and searched the horizon. They were not giving up. They were just adapting. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Jonathan was quiet for a long time. Amelia could tell something was on his mind, but she did not push. She had learned that he would talk when he was ready. Finally he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He took a breath. "If no one comes, if we are never rescued, will you stay with me?" Amelia looked at him. His face was serious, almost nervous, as if he was afraid of her answer. And she understood why. Because the question was not really about the island. It was about everything. It was about whether this love they had found was real enough to last forever, even when forever meant something different than they had planned. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I will stay with you." "You will?" "Jonathan." She moved closer to him, taking his hands. "I have already promised to marry you. I have already promised to spend my life with you. Whether that life happens in a penthouse in New York or a hut on this island does not change anything. You are my home now. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. She could feel him shaking slightly and she realized he was crying. "I was so afraid," he whispered, "that when you really thought about it you would change your mind. That you would realize you deserved better than a life with no guarantee of rescue. There are no guarantees in life, period." She pulled back to look at him. "We could have stayed in our regular lives and been hit by a bus tomorrow. At least here, at least with you, I know I am exactly where I am supposed to be." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I do not deserve you. You deserve everything good in this world, Jonathan Pierce. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you believe that." They stayed up late that night, talking about what their life could look like if rescue never came. They would build a bigger shelter, something with multiple rooms. They would figure out how to fish more efficiently, how to preserve food, how to prepare for storms. They would create a life that was sustainable and comfortable and full of love. And if rescue did come, they would carry this experience with them forever. The lessons they had learned. The strength they had found. The love that had bloomed in the most unlikely place. "Either way," Jonathan said as they finally lay down to sleep, "we win." "Yes," Amelia agreed, curling into his side. "Either way we win." It was day 42 when they saw it. Amelia was at the stream, filling water bottles, when she heard Jonathan shouting her name. His voice was urgent, excited, unlike anything she had heard before. She dropped the bottles and ran. When she reached the beach, she saw what had caused the commotion. A ship. It was far out on the horizon, just a small shape against the vast blue of the ocean. But it was definitely there. It was definitely real. "The signal fire," Jonathan said, already running. "We need to make it bigger." They worked together, throwing dry brush and leaves onto the fire until it roared high into the sky. Thick smoke billowed upward, visible for miles. "Come on," Amelia whispered, staring at the ship. "Please see us. Please." Minutes passed. The ship continued on its path, neither approaching nor receding. It was impossible to tell if they had been spotted. Then, slowly the ship began to turn. "It is coming," Jonathan breathed. "Amelia, it is coming this way." She grabbed his hand, squeezing so tight her knuckles went white. Her heart was pounding. Her eyes were filling with tears. After 6 weeks, after everything they had been through, rescue was finally within reach. But as the ship drew closer, something strange happened. It stopped. They watched, confused, as the ship anchored about a mile offshore. They waited for a smaller boat to be launched, for someone to come to shore. But nothing happened. The ship just sat there, rocking gently on the waves. "Why are they not coming?" Amelia said, her voice tight with frustration. "I do not know." Jonathan was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "Maybe they are assessing the situation. Maybe they need to confirm our signal before they send anyone." Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. The ship remained where it was. Finally, as the light began to fade, they saw movement. A small boat was lowered from the ship's deck, and it began making its way toward the island. Oh my God! Amelia grabbed Jonathan's arm. They're coming. They are actually coming. The boat reached the shallow water, and two men in Coast Guard uniforms jumped out and waded to shore. They looked exhausted but relieved. Mr. Pierce, one of them said, approaching quickly. Miss Foster. We have been searching for you for 6 weeks. Are you injured? No, Jonathan said. We are okay. We are both okay. The other officer was speaking into a radio, relaying their location and condition. Amelia heard words like, survivors found, and stable condition, and preparing for evacuation. It was real. It was finally real. But as the reality sank in, Amelia felt something unexpected. Grief. Not grief for the life they were leaving behind exactly, but grief for the simplicity, for the isolation, for the world they had built together, just the two of them, where nothing else mattered. She looked at Jonathan and saw the same mix of emotions on his face. Joy and relief and a strange aching sadness. Whatever happens next, he said quietly so only she could hear, we face it together. Remember. Together, she agreed. Always. The Coast Guard officers led them to the boat. As they pushed off from shore, Amelia looked back at the island one last time. At the beach where they had washed up, barely alive. At the shelter they had built with their own hands. At the signal fire, still burning bright. Thank you, she whispered to the island. For everything. Then she turned around and faced forward, toward the ship, toward the world, toward whatever came next. The hospital in Honolulu was bright and clean and overwhelmingly loud. After 6 weeks of hearing nothing but waves and wind and bird song, the constant noise of civilization was almost unbearable. Machines beeped. Phones rang. Voices echoed in the hallways. Amelia lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. The doctors had examined her and pronounced her remarkably healthy, considering the circumstances. A few cuts and bruises, some dehydration, mild malnutrition. Nothing that rest and regular meals would not fix. Jonathan was in a room down the hall, receiving the same good news. Her mother was on her way. Grace too. They were catching the first flight from Atlanta, and they would be here by morning. Amelia had cried when she heard their voices on the phone, and they had cried too, and for a few minutes nobody could speak at all. I thought you were dead, her mother had sobbed. They told us the plane went down and there were no survivors. They told us to start planning a funeral. I am here, Mom, Amelia had said through her own tears. I am okay. I am coming home. But even as she said the words, she was not sure what home meant anymore. Atlanta? Her tiny apartment? Her old life before the crash, before Jonathan, before everything changed? A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Jonathan standing in the doorway, dressed in hospital scrubs instead of his usual designer suit. He looked tired and happy and a little nervous. Can I come in? He asked. Of course. He walked to her bed and sat down on the edge, taking her hand. For a moment they just looked at each other, drinking in the sight of each other in this new, strange context. How are you feeling? He asked. Overwhelmed. She squeezed his hand. You. The same. He paused. I have been thinking. About what? About what happens next. His eyes searched her face. I know everything is different now. We are back in the real world. There are expectations and complications and all sorts of things we did not have to deal with on the island. Her heart sank slightly. Are you having second thoughts? No. His voice was firm. Never. I just want to make sure you have not. She reached up and touched his face. Jonathan. I told you I would stay with you forever. I meant it. Island or no island. Relief flooded his features. I want to introduce you to my father. Your father. He is flying in tomorrow. I called him from the Coast Guard ship. Jonathan smiled. I told him I was engaged. He is extremely excited to meet you. Oh. Amelia blinked. That is fast. Too fast. His smile faltered. I'm sorry. If you need more time. No. She shook her head. It is not too fast. It is just. I never thought I would be meeting the father of a billionaire CEO the day after being rescued from a deserted island. He laughed and the tension broke. When you put it that way, it does sound a bit ridiculous. A bit. But that is our story. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. Ridiculous and impossible and absolutely perfect. Yes, she agreed. Absolutely perfect. The next few days were a blur. Jonathan's father, Thomas Pierce, arrived on a private jet and swept into the hospital like a force of nature. He was a tall man with silver hair and the same blue eyes as his son, and he immediately pulled Amelia into a hug that left her breathless. "Thank you," he said gruffly, "for keeping my son alive." "He kept me alive too," she replied. "We saved each other." Thomas pulled back and looked at her appraisingly. Then he smiled. "I can see why he loves you." Amelia's mother and sister arrived shortly after. Nicole Foster was a petite woman with the same warm brown skin and kind eyes as her daughter, and she cried all over again when she saw Amelia in person. Grace hung back at first, still processing the shock of her sister being alive, but eventually she joined the hug too. "Do not ever do that again," Nicole said sternly, holding Amelia's face in her hands. "Do not ever let me think you are dead." "I will do my best, Mom." The families met over dinner that night, at a restaurant with ocean views that made Amelia feel both nostalgic and grateful. Jonathan sat beside her, his hand resting on her knee under the table, grounding her through the chaos of introductions and conversations. "I want you to know," Jonathan said, addressing Nicole directly, "that I love your daughter more than anything in this world. And I want to take care of her and your whole family." Nicole's eyes narrowed slightly. "Take care of how?" "Grace's nursing school tuition. Your retirement. Anything you need." He held up a hand when Nicole started to protest. "Please. It is not charity. It is not pity. It is just family helping family. That is what we do when we love someone." Amelia watched her mother struggle with this. Nicole Foster had spent her whole life working hard and asking for nothing from anyone. Accepting help went against every instinct she had. But then Nicole looked at Amelia, at the happiness radiating from her daughter's face, at the way Jonathan held her hand like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Okay," Nicole said finally. "Thank you. I accept." Grace let out a little cheer and hugged Jonathan so hard he nearly fell off his chair. Thomas laughed out loud. And Amelia felt her heart expand to twice its size, filled with love for these people who were now, against all odds, becoming one family. They got married 6 months later. It was a small ceremony just like Amelia had always imagined. Her mother walked her down the aisle. Grace was her maid of honor. Thomas stood beside his son as best man. The guest list was fewer than 30 people, all of them loved ones, no business associates or society connections in sight. Amelia wore a simple white dress that made her brown skin glow. Jonathan wore a blue suit that matched his eyes. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises about partnership and perseverance and the kind of love that survives plane crashes and deserted islands. "I thought I lost everything when that plane went down," Jonathan said, his voice steady and sure. "But I found everything instead. I found you." "You asked me once if I would stay with you forever," Amelia replied. "I said yes then and I say yes now and I will keep saying yes for the rest of my life." The reception was held at a beautiful venue overlooking the ocean. There was dancing and laughter and more tears than anyone could count. Grace gave a speech that made everyone cry. Thomas gave a speech that made everyone laugh. And when Jonathan and Amelia had their first dance as husband and wife, the whole room fell silent, watching two people who had been through everything together move as one. Late in the evening, as the party wound down, Jonathan led Amelia outside to a quiet balcony. The stars were out, bright and clear, just like they had been on the island. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy." She leaned against him and sighed. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and all of this will have been a dream." "It is not a dream." He wrapped his arms around her. "It is real. We are real." "I know." She turned to face him. "But sometimes I miss it. The island. The simplicity. Just you and me and nothing else." She smiled. "I know that sounds crazy." "It does not sound crazy." He kissed her forehead. "I miss it too sometimes. But we can have that simplicity whenever we want. We can go back to basics, strip away the noise, find each other again. Promise? Promise?" They stood there for a long time watching the stars, breathing in sync. And Amelia thought about how strange life was. How a terrible thing like a plane crash could lead to the most wonderful thing she had ever known. How fear could become courage, and loss could become gain, and a deserted island could become the birthplace of the greatest love story she had ever heard. "Thank you," she whispered into the night. "For what?" "For asking me to stay with you." Jonathan smiled and pulled her closer. "Thank you for saying yes."